I would really like to throw in here is overdiagnosis. Now, there's a difference in melanoma diagnosis and melanoma death. Melanoma death is a very robust endpoint. You've had a serious melanoma, it's fatal. Now, there's some data from America here is tremendous. Fantastic paper by Adewale Adamson, an American dermatologist down in Texas. And he had a paper actually in the New England Journal about 2 years ago where he looked at melanoma diagnosis in America over the last 40 years. So the number of melanomas, predominantly superficial spreading melanomas, diagnosed in America now are 6 times as many as there were 40 years ago. So a 6-fold rise. Now he points out in this paper that UV at most doubles your risk of developing melanoma. So say 40 years ago they all lived in caves. Say now everybody got sunburnt at maximum UV, you would expect a doubling of melanoma at most. And in fact, there's been a 6-fold rise. And he then shows that what determines your risk of being diagnosed with a melanoma is not where you live in America. You would expect, if it's driven by UV, you'd expect Florida to have lots more than Alaska. He finds there is no correlation whatsoever between how much sunlight there is where you live and your risk of melanoma. But he finds there is an absolutely tight, straight line relationship between access to a dermatologist, how many dermatologists there are, how many biopsies are done. Basically, it's overdiagnosis. And he then shows that they took microscope slides from 40 years ago, which had been some diagnosed as melanoma, some diagnosed as funny mole, dysplastic nevus, not melanoma, and put them in front of pathologists today. And a significant number of those biopsies that were diagnosed as not a melanoma 40 years ago were diagnosed as melanoma when being looked at pathologists by now. Now, the problem is the only way of knowing if something's going to kill you is to take half of it out, sit there and see what happens, and you just can't get the volunteers. Nor can you get the ethics committee, nor would it right to do it. But there is no... The problem with diagnosis of melanoma is its dermatologist looks at it saying, yeah, it looks like a melanoma. That's it. Pathologist, you do a biopsy, put it on a slide, pathologist looks at it and goes, yeah, it looks like a melanoma. So the whole thing is based on an impression. Now, if you're diagnosing a stroke, if you're diagnosing a heart attack, you do a blood test, you do the troponin levels. There is an unambiguous blood test which gives you a troponin level, which is a sensitive and highly specific indicator of a myocardial infarction. Melanoma diagnosis is always an impression. And the other thing about melanoma diagnosis, there are no prizes for missing one. If you say, oh, it looks like a funny mole and it turns out to be a melanoma and it kills them, that is the end of your career, or it's a very expensive mistake. If you say, and it's harmless mole, oh, it's a melanoma, and you cut it out, not only you then have an incredibly grateful patient. My God, I had a melanoma. My life has been saved. Even if the reality of the matter is they never had a melanoma. It was just a mole. It was never going to do anything. So the whole diagnostic shift, it's not malicious, but it's moving one way. Where it is wrong is in America, there's been a big commercial change in melanoma practice in the last 40 years. So in the US, venture capitalists have bought up dermatology practices and they have bought up pathologists. And they've said revenue maximization now. The more biopsies, I want dermatologists to do more biopsies, a chargeable event, to feed biopsies to pathologists, a chargeable event, who can feed So there's been this financial pressure for dermatologists to do more, see more, do more biopsies, and this huge, great commercial drive. So they've repeated this study. They've looked again in Australia. It looks like there is a degree of overdiagnosis in Australia, and I'm going to have to go and revise these papers. I'm at the moment trying to get the data for the last 40 years in Scotland and see if the same thing has happened here. Because here and in Australia, just like in America, we've had a big rise in the number of melanomas diagnosed, meaning dermatologist says, yeah, I think it is. Pathologist says, yeah, I think it is. That's the level, I'm afraid to say, that's how it's diagnosed. There has been no change in deaths. And I am suspicious of the dermatologist's view that this is, thank God we're there saving lives. If we hadn't done it, I don't think dermatologists are chasing an epidemic. I think there is a strong chance here that dermatologists are creating an epidemic. And I actually think I think overdiagnosis, to me, strikes me as a much more likely than factors we haven't considered leading to more melanoma. I don't think we've necessarily got more melanoma.